Chapter 11. Match of the Century. Friday, November 13th, 1981. Linda and Janice were waiting in the muted morning light of their kitchen. This ambush wasn't unexpected, Velia thought. Her behavior the past week had made it an inevitability, and she felt it coming since she woke up. Have a seat. Linda unfolded her arms to point at the chair across from her and Janice. Want something to eat? Janice asked Velia, starting to stand from her own seat before being waved off by Linda. No, Velia replied, taking a seat between the pair. What time did you get home last night? Linda interrogated. Just before midnight. I made sure I was quiet when Linda scowled. You mean you tried to sneak in? You knew I had to work late. I called and told you. The Malibu Grand Prix closes at 9 p.m. on weeknights. There were machines I had to fix, and I couldn't do it until we closed. Kevin gave me a ride home. The second part of the explanation was true, but she couldn't tell her mother the real reason she'd stayed late was to prepare for the battle against Roger. Your behavior over the last week has been absolutely unacceptable. And not just at home. Ms. Alexander called. When? Velia challenged. Last night, right after you and I hung up. She's worried that you're displaying an increased level of aggression toward your classmates, especially Roger, and that it's going to end in violence. Have you really been learning hand-to-hand combat at work? Velia rolled her eyes. Kevin is teaching me a little self-defense, that's all. It was Ms. Alexander's idea to begin with. Why do you want to learn how to be violent? Linda fumed. Janice can fight. Velia looked at her for support. The Navy required it as part of my basic training, Janice explained. It's not something I would have done on my own. What's really going on here? Linda's oscillating gaze between her daughter's eyes expressed her desperation for the truth. I told you, Velia yelled, her blood pressure skyrocketing. Roger is a bully. Everyone gives him a pass. I'm not going to be walked on by a savage, even if you're willing to be. Linda's mouth dropped open, but no words emerged. You don't understand how hard it is for your mother, for professional women in a man's world, but violence is never bullshit, Velia shouted at Janice. Would you like a bar of soap in your mouth? Linda exploded. Velia crossed her arms to match her mother. If you're anxious about Roger, Janice tried to pour water on the feud. We can talk to the principal about— What will that do? Velia seethed. Everyone gives him a pass because of who his father is. Then we'll insist they let you change classes, Linda said. No! Velia barked. Why should I have to run away? Roger is the problem, not me! I don't have time to deal with this anymore. Linda stood and grabbed her purse from the counter. I'll call Kevin after work and talk to him about the karate. It's called Krav Maga. Linda's face was red with rage. Whatever it's called, it ends. Today. Her mother pulled the VW keys from her purse and summoned Janice. I need you to drop me off, please. We'll talk more about this at dinner, Janice said to Velia. Be home by 6, Linda demanded, shuffling out the door. The mix of anger and fear churning in her gut left no room for hunger. So Velia fetched her jacket and headed to the bus stop. Before any of the other kids arrived, she made a split-second decision. She wasn't going to waste time at school today. She'd go to work. The guilt of breaking a promise to her mother proved fleeting. Beating Roger in front of everyone was the only real solution to her problems. It's all that mattered at this point, she told herself. Having an entire day of uninterrupted practice would help her claim the life she wanted. A life that didn't make her feel so small. The boy's seizure over a week ago had renewed pressure on Kevin to close the arcade during the day. He refused. Even after the long march to work, there was a chance he wouldn't be there yet. But she knew how to break in. Blocks from the Malibu Grand Prix, she saw something in the sky. Hovering on the horizon less than a mile away was a silver circle. It didn't move like a plane or a helicopter. Velia watched it intently. Then without warning or movement, it disappeared. Her focus was brought back to Earth by a familiar and unwelcome face pulling up alongside her. It was the man in the brown van. Hey there, old friend, he said from the open driver's side window, his arm resting on the frame. He was so close she could see the two-tone pattern on the exposed flesh of his forearm. It looked like an elaborate tree bough with curved branches and leaves. It wasn't a tattoo. The fractal pattern was elevated from the surrounding skin and looked more like scars. Go sit on a telephone pole and rotate, Velia replied, walking confidently down the sidewalk as he crept alongside her. Your wit is one of your most impressive characteristics, Velia. The use of her name sent lightning up her spine, and she ran. This time he didn't chase her. He sat on the side of the road, fading into the distance as she opened up space between them. All the fight conditioning with Kevin over the last 2 weeks had improved her stamina. She had gone at least a mile before the first signs of fatigue set in. But she pushed through it, running the remaining blocks to work. She shook the front door, but it was locked. Velia raced around to the back of the building, hopping a fence and cutting across the racetrack to reach one of the emergency exits. It was locked too. She pulled 2 bobby pins from her hair, quickly picked the lock, and slammed the door behind her. Tears came once inside the safety of the arcade. She released the reins over her rage and started pounding on the cinder block wall until the bottoms of her clenched fists were red. Exhausted, physically and emotionally, she moved to the back office and locked the door to wait for Kevin. Velia dug through her tools to find the biggest flathead screwdriver in the bag. Time slowed to a crawl. After a few uneventful minutes, she decided to sit down and grabbed her forgotten copy of Parallel Lives off the desk. She hated feeling small and vulnerable, yet again, Velia admitted as she started to read. This wasn't the life she wanted to live. More than an hour later, the front doorbell chimed. Velia's heart skipped every other beat while she crouched behind the desk, clenching the improvised weapon. The doorknob rattled a few times. What the? Kevin questioned. She jumped to her feet and opened the office door, startling her boss into a fighting stance. Velia? She wrapped herself around him. What are you doing here? Are you okay? Velia choked on her words. No, I'm not. Kevin guided her back into the office. She explained her run-in with the same creeper in the van. I'll call the police. No! My mom can't know I'm here. Kevin rubbed his head. The duo sat in silence until she was calm. Then, because life had to be lived, they moved on with their day and opened for business. For hours, Velia was the only one in the arcade. Playing Polybius helped put the morning's trials out of her mind, and she refocused all of her attention on the final trial that awaited. A surge of adults entered and exited the arcade during the lunchtime hour. A few gathered around her, but she ignored their requests for a turn. She periodically felt a presence over her shoulder and would check the reflection of the game's plexiglass bezel for the man in the van, but he never materialized.
School's been out for a half hour, Kevin said from behind the register. Friday crowd will be arriving soon. You ready?
Absolutely, Velia said confidently, jerking at the joystick.
Fried before the fall,
Kevin quipped. She glared at him, crashing her craft at the edge of the 11th level checkpoint. For fuck's sake! Anger won't help you win. You need to clear your mind so you can focus on the fight. Everything else is a distraction. Kevin was speaking in metaphors now, but she knew he was right. Velia walked out the front door and inhaled the crisp November air. It hadn't snowed yet, but she could feel it coming. The scent of earthy minerals lingered in the cloudy sky. What a fitting setting for Friday the 13th, she thought, returning inside the arcade to wait. Time was crawling again. She checked the clock every few seconds. Maybe Roger thought she'd chickened out since she wasn't at school. All musing was put to bed when her nemesis entered the arcade. Kids were following Roger as if he were Moses and the Pacific Northwest was their desert. Getting an extra practice? Roger taunted. You'll need it. Velia stood confidently. Murmurs spread across the crowd of spectators. Roger sniffed at Velia's hair as he walked by. Who's going first? A kid asked. Flip for it, another insisted. Kevin whistled to get the combatants' attention, then tossed each a quarter. Check them. Roger suspected foul play. The same kid from the crowd checked each piece of metal, then turned to the pair to ask, Who's calling it? Velia grinned at Roger through grit teeth. Ladies first. Heads, Roger declared as the coin was tossed. Washington's baldness shined from the floor. Roger retrieved the quarter and moved into position in front of Polybius. He'd perfected a strategy of brute force, relying on constant gunning to reach the double-digit levels. It was a risky battle plan, with zero room for error, but through muscle memory and rote maneuvering, He'd reclaimed the high score from Velya over the last week. Today was no exception, and the score counter surged as he blasted through the geometric obstacles. On more than one occasion, he faced certain death, but the sounds of the crowd's gasps proved premature. As Roger passed level 10, Velya's spirits slumped. This was as far as she'd been able to get. Roger reveled in the accomplishment of breaking his own score, driven on by the audience's adoration as he reached level 11, then 12. Everyone's focus converged on the bright chaos of Polybius. A hush had come over the crowd now. The loudest sounds in the arcade were the furious clicking of Roger actuating the buttons and the game's intensifying space-esque soundscape. Velya looked away. With every point scored, the probability of her success diminished. Kevin's eyes met Velya's, and he held his fists up. The message was clear. Never surrender. She took a deep breath, refilling her body with optimism. Just as the inevitable happened, and Roger's craft smashed into a small rectangle, ending his heroic run.
God damn it!
Roger fumed before smiling at his score. Good luck, he baited, flicking Velya's hair. Velya took over the controls and fed her quarter into the machine. She'd been gripping the coin so tightly that a bird of war imprinted into her right palm. Her maneuvers in the game were slower, but more precise, making for a less exciting spectator experience. In her peripheral vision, she noticed some of the crowd dispersing. They'd already written her off. She pushed that thought out of her mind and was sucked back into the gameplay. She felt herself slipping into the flow state, something she'd experienced many times over the last week while preparing for this face-off. Level by level, her score steadily climbed. Checkpoints continued to be a viable strategy to reach the 10th level, but a voice as clear as someone speaking to her said to abandon that approach and match Roger's pattern of brute force. The risks made her stomach churn, but the voice kept repeating itself. So she listened. The audience was drawn back in, their volume climbing in tandem with her improved performance. Roger had been aloof to this point, but as she reached the 11th level, his attention was glued to the screen. Cheers erupted as she reached level 12 and closed in on Roger's score. The kids pushed forward to get closer to the screen. Velya felt the heat of their collective breathing on the back of her neck before Roger used the opportunity to knock her forward into the controls, crashing her craft.
What the hell?
Velya shouted, shoving him off her. Roger grinned, holding his hands up.
Don't blame me.
She'd been within 100 points of victory.
You did that on purpose, asshole!
That's what a loser would say, Roger remarked. The rage inside her boiled over, and she slammed her open palms into Roger's chest. He barely budged before slapping her in the face. She lunged at his throat, but Kevin suddenly appeared between them. The other kids were in a frenzy, drowning out whatever demeaning things Roger was yelling while he made chopping motions with his fingers. Kevin tried to contain her, but she flailed her arms at the injustice of it all. She wanted blood. The melee was interrupted by the shouts of someone standing at the front door. Ladies and gentlemen, I need all of you to stay right where you are. Everyone turned to see the origin of the voice, but Velya immediately recognized the face. It was the man from the van. He was wearing a black suit and sunglasses now, surrounded by a dozen other men dressed in the same outfit. A few of the kids tried to scatter, but more men blocked the exits. Velya's stalker walked with impunity through the crowd, which parted before him like the Red Sea. I need you to let go of this girl, please, the man said, flashing a badge in Kevin's face. What's going on? Kevin questioned. The man ignored him and turned to face Velya. Miss Wolf? I need you to come with us, right now. What? Velya mouthed as two other men in black suits grabbed her arms. Another pair placed themselves between her and Kevin. No, absolutely not! Kevin fumed. Velya was unable to formulate a complete sentence as they dragged her out to the parking lot. I'm calling the police! Kevin threatened before being ringed by more of the men. The man from the van removed his glasses and faced Kevin. This is a federal matter. The local police will defer you to our main office in Washington, D.C. He handed Kevin something resembling a gray brick with telephone buttons and a black antenna. Here, call them. Kevin turned the device in his hand. What's this? It's called a mobile phone. Go ahead, dial 911.
Kevin hesitated.
Why is she being arrested? Racketeering. She installed counters on your arcades.
Velia?
Roger protested to the man.
Are you for real?
She's also wanted for the attempted murder of a boy 2 towns over. He half smiled at Roger. You're lucky she didn't try to kill you too.
This is horseshit,
Kevin said, pressing the buttons on the phone.
He placed it to his ear, but nothing happened. You have to hit the little red button, the man instructed, placing his glasses back on his face. Kevin followed the directions, instantly sending a pulse of red plasma from the device reverberating across the arcade. Everyone but the men in black dropped like flies. The man from the van bent over and pulled his mobile phone from Kevin's hand, then carefully stepped over the unconscious patrons and joined Velia in the parking lot. Through the front door, she saw the mass of intertwined bodies on the arcade's floor. Anger and fear oscillated in her like a pendulum. Make sure the game gets pulled from the building, then implant the alt memory file in all of them, and bag her, the man instructed his team. Another agent placed a black hood over Velia's head. They shoved her into a waiting Land Cruiser and sped away from the arcade.